thank you for joining me for another episode of 25 Backstory. I'm Rondell Joseph. We've got another good one for you. She started off working in a hospital but jumped into the broadcasting business, and since her leave from news several years ago, she's still heard on the radio. I sit down with WCPT 820 radio show host Joan Esposito, who talks about some of the experiences she saw at ABC 7, NBC 5, and she weighs in on fellow friends and former colleagues. Take a look. Well, welcome to 25 Backstory. So tell me, Joan, what was it that made you interested in being in the broadcasting business?
I was teaching nurses at the time. I was putting on educational seminars for nurses, and I met a bunch of people who worked at the local CBS station in Columbus, Ohio, and got to know them. And I had never in a million years considered a career in broadcasting, but they kept saying to me, you should do what we do. You would really like it. It's fun. And I didn't know any better, so I decided to make a career change. And I was very lucky because I was in a generation where there weren't as many people with a journalism degree or as a communications degree as there are now. Lots of times now, newsrooms, they wouldn't look at somebody who has a different background. But it was a time when other people were considered for these jobs, and I asked around and I started calling people up and trying to get interviews, and I eventually got a part-time TV job and a part-time radio job, just because it seemed like it was more fun than what I was doing.
Okay, so let's fast track to the 80s, because you had came to Chicago over 4 decades ago. You had spent several years in TV with many fixtures, such as the late John Drury every weekday on ABC 7 News at 5, and of course on NBC 5 with Warner Saunders and Ron Majors. So what was it like as being in the TV department here in Chicago?
Well, it was pretty exciting. I mean, I worked in Columbus, Ohio, and then I moved out to California and I worked in Sacramento before I came to Chicago. But, my dream, no matter whether I was in broadcasting or teaching or anything else, my dream was to live in either LA, Chicago, or New York. I wanted to live in a big city. And when I was able to come to Chicago to do news, I mean, it was a dream come true. I mean, I actually was able to work with Fahey Flynn, who's certainly before your time, but when I got to town, he was a god. I mean, Bill Curtis they were gods. It was so exciting to be a part of all that tradition. And Chicago was a great town because, in LA, they have news, but a lot of what they care about is the entertainment industry. And in New York, again, they care about news, but they've got so much else going on. It's such an international world center. Whereas Chicago, news was really, really important, and people paid attention to it. I mean, people would know, like that was in the days of council wars, and people would care about what was going on in the Chicago City Council. And this was a news town that was, to me, like no other. It was great.
So as I said, you worked with Fahey Flynn. So what was it when you had started working with John Drury on the 5 o'clock show at ABC 7 back in the mid-'80s, before Diane came in, and later on you were working with Warner at 4 o'clock on NBC 5. So you were also, not only did you work with John, but you were also you jumped over to NBC 5 working with Warner. You were pretty much neck and neck with Joel Daly and Linda Yu at 4.
Well, when I was at Channel 5, I went on at 5 o'clock and they were off by 5 o'clock. We weren't head-to-head competitors, but it was funny because, Linda Yu started at Channel 5 and moved to 7, and I started at 7 and moved to 5. But we were always, and to this day still are, great friends. I just saw her Sunday, and she's doing great. but there really was a lot of camaraderie. I don't know, I assume there still is, but the business has changed. People come and go a little bit more frequently. And, when I first got to Chicago, there were people on the air and they'd be on the air for, 20 years, like John Drury. I mean, he just had this incredible long career in Chicago. And I don't think you see that kind of consistency as much anymore. I don't know. Maybe I'm just an old fogey reminiscing about the good old days. I don't know, Rondell.
And I will tell you this: I had been in the news business for a long time. I've watched many people like Diane, Ron, Kathy, Brock, of course, and I've always watched Linda Yu growing up. And let's not forget, I keep this right next to me.
Oh, wow. She would be so pleased.
Yes, she indeed is. So you've been out of the news industry on TV for 20 plus years now. So what is it like for you to be in the radio business to this day?
Well, like I said, when I first got into the broadcasting industry, I got two part-time jobs. I worked part-time for the NBC station in Columbus, doing a magazine show and doing stories for that show. And I worked part-time for a radio station. I covered, during the week, I covered city council for them. I covered the school board meetings for them. And then I anchored the news on Saturday mornings from like 6 a.m. to noon, something like that. So, one of my first jobs was in radio. And from time to time, I would still, be a guest on somebody's radio show. From time to time, I would fill in. I did a stint at BEZ. I did a stint. I would occasionally fill in at WGN. So I sort of kept a little bit of contact with the world of radio. So it wasn't such a huge new change for me because I had done radio before, but the kind of radio I'm doing with talk radio, when you work in a newsroom, it's all about the story. It's all about fair and balanced. It's about you being sort of a vessel to bring that story to light, but you're not really supposed to put any part of you into it. And with talk radio, it's the exact opposite. The whole point of talk radio is to be all about yourself and your thoughts and your feelings. So at first, when I started doing this again, that was it was hard for me to give opinions because that had been so instilled in me that you don't give opinions. You say this person says this person says that, sort of like you make your own choice. And with the kind of show I do now, it's all about saying this person said this and I think they're right, or this person said this and I think they're crazy. The exact opposite. What I did before.
Now, I want to ask you this, Joan. What was your most memorable story that you covered, whether it was in radio or TV?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. When I was a reporter for television, I spent a number of years as a medical reporter because that's something that I had familiarity with. And I really enjoyed doing that. I loved bringing people new information about breakthroughs, new treatments, new drugs, that sort of thing. But I mean, the stories that you carry with you tend to be the less happy stories, the ones that really have an emotional impact. The stories about tragedies and deaths, those are the ones that are harder to forget and move on from. And I mean, while I was never an entertainment reporter, from time to time in the newsroom, if the entertainment reporter was busy, they'd say, we need somebody to go here or do this. And if I wasn't busy, I would volunteer. So, I mean, I got to interview Ray Charles and I got to interview Lena Horne. And I didn't do it very often, but it was always such a nice change of pace. And I'll never forget how interesting and wonderful and kind they were. in those interviews. So that was always something that sticks with you too.
I'm gonna tell you this. You're the first person I've talked to and who has actually sat down with big time Hollywood stars. In my entire series of 25 backstory, you're the first.
Well, I hope you have many more because those are really fun interviews and they're really fascinating. I had to Ray Charles was doing a press junket, which means that they schedule all of us for you get 3 o'clock. Linda, you get 3:15. Joan Esposito, you get 3:30, and then we all go in, we do our bits, and move on for the next person. And I remember the person ahead of me, I think it was Greg Cott. It was somebody who really knew music and really knew Ray Charles history. And all I kept thinking was, they're having this big discussion about, gospel music 20 years ago and how that's influenced him. And all I could think of was, my God, you're interviewing Ray Charles and he's going to think you're an idiot. Because you don't know anything of any kind. I didn't have any kind of in-depth musical knowledge. I was a warm body when they needed one to send out to do the interview. And I got to tell you, he couldn't have been nicer. He could not have been nicer and sweeter and really made me feel so at ease and not like an idiot, which was good.
Okay, so Joan, let's jump to this one. This was recent because you became the trending person of March 2021 as you were one of the first and top on-air personnel who defended Mark Giangreco during the saga in March, which your comment was trending on Feeder. Did you ever feel that people would turn against you because of the comment you had made?
Not really. I mean, I wasn't trashing Cheryl Burton at all. Mark has always been Mark. He's always been somebody who liked to tease, particularly the women he worked with. And, that's kind of his thing. And, people take teasing differently. And, like if it had been me or Carol Marine, I mean, we would have just smacked him back. I mean, that's kind of the relationship, that we had. But, everybody's different and times change. I just thought, I mean, he's done a lot of things over his career. He's crossed a lot of lines, far worse. He's done so many things that were so much worse than this, that it seemed like such a small thing to lose an entire decades-long career over. And I thought it was tragic. And I said that, if I wished that Cheryl had just gone to Mark to complain rather than having her agent go to management, which always has repercussions. If she'd have gone to Mark and said, I know you were trying to be funny, but I really felt disrespected and I felt hurt. Mark would have fallen all over himself to apologize because he wants to be funny. He wants to be snarky, but he doesn't want to hurt anybody. He never has. And he never will consciously set out to disrespect or hurt someone. And I just wish that the two of them had worked it out personally. It was really a tragedy, I thought.
And as you said, of course, you've seen a lot of changes in the media in recent years, especially in Chicago. In the last couple of years, we've seen so many people dropped from certain stations with different add-ins. As you said, if you ever work in this business, you'll be fired at least once. As you had said in your interview with Jackie Bang on WCPT back in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's the joke, you're not really a broadcaster until you've been fired. Then you're really a broadcaster, because it happens to everybody. It happens to almost everybody. I mean, I don't know that Linda Yu was ever fired. But certainly, things didn't go her way at Channel 5. I mean, they weren't happy with her. She wasn't happy with them. I mean, that's why she left and went to Channel 7. It wasn't because she was, feeling appreciated and was appreciated by her station. I mean, Channel 5 didn't appreciate Jackie Bang either when she was there, and she ended up leaving. So, It doesn't have anything to do really with how good you are. A lot of it, especially in the bad old days, had to do with who was ever in charge and what sort of person they liked. I've told this story on the radio before about the business. I worked in the newsroom at Channel 7. We had a general manager and a news director, the whole deal. And it was accepted within the newsroom that our best reporter was Jay Levine. He was given all the best stories. He was the 10 o'clock reporter. He's the one who was sent to travel. Management was like, oh my God, this guy is as good as it gets. We got a new general manager. The new general manager changed the staff. And the new general manager not only did not think that Jay Levine was the best reporter he'd ever seen, he hated him. In 24 hours, Jay Levine went from being our number one reporter to being considered the worst reporter in the newsroom. Jay hadn't changed. His work hadn't changed. The boss changed. And that's what it was like. Every time, I know, working as a woman with other women I knew, every time we would get a new general manager, everybody would wonder, what kind of women does he like? Is he into blondes? Because whatever his conscious or unconscious biases were, was going to be reflected in who was retained, who was let go, and who was elevated.
So, as I've seen it over the years, like as you said, when we've seen like what's been going on with CBS2 Chicago in recent years, you see their station ratings down on the ground. Of course, we've seen Rob Johnson dropped back in 2019, and we've seen so many changes, mainly on the female side of the desk every weeknight. You've seen in the last 4 years, we have Erica Sargent, previous Kate Sullivan, Ann State, Diane Burns. Just in the last, 18 years alone, CBS2 has seen at least, I'm counting at least 5 different female on-air co-anchors. At least 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the morning show, it's same case. Last 10 years alone, ever since the passing of Randy Salerno, you've seen Roseanne Tellez, thank God she saved herself and jumped over to Fox Chicago. Susan Carlson, Aaron Kennedy. Recently, now Audrina Begas, who's been taking on that seat since Kennedy's layoff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I all of those, they make the joke that what is an anchor? It's the lowest point on a ship going nowhere. It's the first thing you throw overboard. When the ratings aren't good, generally the powers that be, they don't say, well, maybe we need to do more of these kind of stories. No, they say it's the anchor's fault. The anchors aren't drawing the audience. They're not keeping the audience. So they make a change. I know that Kate Sullivan, she was given absolutely no warning. It was like they called her in one day and they said, oh, by the way, you're done. I mean, it was that abrupt. It wasn't like, she'd been told 6 months earlier, Kate, we really don't like what you're doing. We'd like you to do more of this. No, it was like everything's fine until it's not. That's Channel 2. It'll be interesting because, I'm sure you saw Jennifer Lyons, formerly of GN, has been hired as the new general manager there. So I think what we're going to see is some stability there that we haven't seen before. And I think it's going to be great. I think Channel 2 is doing some incredibly good work. The stuff Brad Edwards is doing, the stuff Dave Savini is doing is really terrific. And I think they're finally starting to make a bit of a name for themselves. And I think Jennifer Lyons is going to help with that. And I really think that, great things could be coming their way.
And of course, I did just run into Dave Savini a couple of weeks ago while I was downtown doing some photog work myself. His main coverage has been on the unwarranted wrongful raids in the last couple of years alone. Brad Edwards, who's been on top of the water bill case and stuff like that. Yeah, we've seen CBS2 step up on their investigative crew. We just want to, I know a lot of people are seeing that now, and we're trying to see Channel 2 bring itself back, basically. Because I know they didn't recover since like the late 1990s, back when Lester Holt was there. And you've seen what? David Curley, Antonio Mora, Rob Johnson. Hell, we're seeing Brad Edwards now, who's been taking on the 10 o'clock for the last 2 years. Let's see what happens now since Jennifer Lyons is taking over as general manager, who left News Nation just 6 months ago.
Very well respected in the industry. So I think that she's going to be a good GM for them.
Yes.
And we will see into it just in the coming months, because we're going to see what the ratings say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, Joan, do you have any advice for anyone who would ever want to pursue the business, despite how much it's changing?
Well, the changes aren't all bad. When I got into the business, if you were a woman and you really wanted to make a career of this and really rise through the ranks, you really had to put your personal life on hold. Most of the women of my generation had their kids pretty late in life, late 30s, early 40s, because you just didn't dare take your eye off the ball. You didn't dare be gone. You didn't dare somebody else be in your seat, to make sure that that seat was still there for you. And the younger generation that's in the business, I think, has a far better work-life balance than we did. Now, part of the reason is over the decades, the salaries have come down a lot. I mean, when you're in the big leagues and you're making some serious money, you're going to protect that at all costs. The upside of having those jobs be less lucrative is that people aren't willing to make the same kinds of sacrifices. If you're a woman and you want to date and you want to have a life outside of television and you want to have kids, you can do that now. There's more freedom. And also, I think the younger generation, just whether or not it has anything to do with the finances, they have a better work-life balance than I think a lot of us did when we were coming up through the ranks. And so that's, I think, an upside. The downside is when I was working at 7, and to some degree at 5, but mostly the 80s when I was at 7, local newsrooms used to have these incredible budgets. Anytime there was a big international story, local newsrooms would send a local reporter to cover it for the hometown station. I mean, that just doesn't happen anymore. Nobody has that kind of a budget to send, like, say right now, to send a Chuck Gowdy to Kabul or something like that. That kind of money just doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, it's a strain, sometimes a struggle to even have an investigative team, because the problem with an investigative team is that because the kind of work they do requires time and patience and digging. So they're not going to be on the air every day. It's not going to be like one of your regular newsroom reporters who is going to be on the 4, 5, and 6 p.m. news with a story every day. So even that kind of an investment, the investment that it takes to have an investigative producer and an investigative reporter who, when they break stories, they're going to be big, but maybe it's only going to happen once every month. That's a struggle for a lot of newsrooms right now. So the financial change has had some upside, and it has some downside too.
We've all seen that, and especially in the last 20 years, of course. And Joan, and I see you still you've been doing a lot more, especially on WCBT since the passing of Dick Kay. So how are you guys holding in on the radio now?
Well, what we've been doing on Saturdays is we've been having a series of guest hosts. I think that in the next, certainly within a month, if not sooner, I think we're going to finally name one person to hold down the fort on Saturdays, at least, much of the time. And it happened. Sure, Dick was old and, he didn't walk as fast and he had problems with his knees, but it wasn't like he was suffering from a terminal illness. This wasn't something that anybody saw coming. I mean, he was still on the air and he was 84 years old, for goodness sake. I mean, it was like you sort of felt that he was immortal, that that he was going to be there forever. And when he died, it was bam. I mean, it was fast and it was unexpected, and it's taken the station a while to kind of get past it. I mean, he was a fixture at the station for what? Geez, 12 years? I mean, yeah, it was a big hit.
We will I keep you guys in my thoughts now, especially with this, and I do wish you guys the best on finding a new host.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been interesting listening to the guest hosts.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to listen a little more often. After I sat there and watched your video and radio interview with Jackie back in 2019, I couldn't help but laugh at some of the stuff that basically is true about TV nowadays.
Yeah, Jackie and I go way back. We were not only colleagues at Channel 5, but when things didn't work out at Channel 5, she decided to clear her head. She went backpacking across Europe, and when she came back, she moved in with me, and we were roommates for years. It was wonderful.
And everybody who doesn't know Jackie Bang, if you don't know Jackie Bang, you gotta watch WGN Weekend News, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Joan, thank you so much for taking time out of your Tuesday afternoon to sit down with me.
You're very welcome, Rondell. It's been a pleasure.
Alrighty, I will keep in touch with you, of course.
Okay, will do.
Alright, thank you, Joan.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.